I still remember that Tuesday morning in Chicago as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The sky was gray rain battering the windows of the Ashwood Industries tower, turning the city into a watercolor blur beyond the glass. I sat behind my desk on the 21st floor, surrounded by the familiar clutter of reports, half-drained coffee cups, and sticky notes that never seemed to stay put. My office wasn't large, but it was mine, a small corner of the world that I carved out through years of hard work, long nights, and early mornings. That morning, my team and I were riding high on a wave of victory. Just 24 hours earlier, we'd landed the Harrington account, a partnership with a London-based firm that had the potential to double our annual revenue. I'd spent months preparing for that pitch, working late with Sarah and Daniel, the two people I trusted more than anyone in the company. We'd given everything to that project, missing birthdays, skipping vacations, and sacrificing more weekends than I cared to count. When the contract finally came through, it felt like vindication, proof that all our sacrifices were worth something. There was laughter in the air that morning, real, honest laughter. I could hear Sarah's voice drifting in from her cubicle, cracking some joke about how we'd celebrate with an overpriced lunch, while Daniel argued that nothing short of champagne would do. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax, to let go of the constant tension that came with leading a team in a company as cutthroat as Ashwood. Then, without warning, my door slammed open. Alexander Monroe stormed in, not bothering to knock. He was the kind of man who made an impression everywhere he went, tall, always immaculately dressed in tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, with dark hair slicked back and a jaw that looked like it was carved from marble. But that morning, it was his expression that struck me most. His face was flushed, eyes narrowed in anger, and even from across the room, I could see his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Get rid of your whole team, or you'll regret it," he snapped, his voice sharp and cold, echoing off the walls of my tiny office. For a split second, I just stared at him, caught completely off guard. My heart thudded in my chest, but I forced myself to keep my face calm, my voice steady. I dealt with men like Alexander before, men who thought the world owed them something because of the name they carried, but I'd never let fear decide for me. "No," I said, my tone firm and clear. "They're the best people we've got, and you know it." Alexander's eyes flashed with fury. For a moment, it seemed like he might say more, but instead, he just glared at me with undisguised contempt. He turned sharply on his heel and stormed out, the echo of his expensive shoes reverberating down the hallway long after he was gone. I sat back in my chair, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Through the glass wall of my office, I saw Sarah and Daniel look up, their faces tense with worry. Sarah mouthed, "Are you okay?" I managed a small, reassuring smile and shook my head slightly, signaling for them to stay focused, to let me handle this. But inside, I was anything but calm. I knew Alexander's reputation. He was the boss's only son, the heir apparent, and he'd been given far more responsibility than he deserved. I'd heard rumors about how he'd treated people before, how he'd pushed out those who disagreed with him, reshuffled teams on a whim, and bullied his way into power. I had always managed to stay out of his crosshairs until now. I tried to focus on the numbers in front of me, reviewing the details of the Harrington contract, but my mind kept replaying Alexander's words. "Get rid of your whole team, or you'll regret it." Why would he want to break up the team that had just secured the biggest deal of the year? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. There was something behind his anger, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Before I could think about it any longer, my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen and saw the name, Henry Monroe. The CEO, Alexander's father. "My boss, Olivia, could you come to my office, please?" His voice sounded tired and a little strained. My stomach twisted into knots. It was never a good sign to be summoned by the CEO, especially not after an encounter like the one I just had. But I knew I couldn't avoid it. I squared my shoulders, ran a hand through my hair, and tried to steel myself for whatever was coming next. The walk down the hall felt longer than usual. As I passed the rows of offices, I could feel eyes following me, people sensing that something was wrong, but not knowing what. I tried to keep my head up, to walk with confidence, even as my thoughts raced. When I reached Henry's office, I paused for a moment outside the heavy wooden door, forcing myself to take a breath. I'd always respected Henry. He wasn't the kind of leader who ruled through fear, at least, not until Alexander started working in the company. I knocked softly and waited for his response. "Come in," he called, his voice muffled. I stepped inside. Henry was sitting at his desk, the lines on his face deeper than usual, his eyes fixed on a folder in front of him. He barely looked up as I entered, and the tension in the room was almost palpable. I sat down across from him, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain pattered steadily against the window, a soft background to the silence. Finally, Henry looked up at me, his eyes weary. "I'm sorry to call you in like this, Olivia," he began, "but I need to ask you something important." And in that moment I knew the real storm was just beginning. The silence in Henry's office pressed in on me like a heavy blanket, thick and suffocating. Even before he spoke, I could feel that something fundamental had shifted. Henry Monroe, always the one to greet me with a warm handshake and a kind smile, looked nothing like himself. He sat slouched behind his grand oak desk, shoulders hunched as if the weight of the whole company had landed on his back overnight. The rain continued its quiet drumming against the tall windows, a somber soundtrack to what I somehow already knew was coming. I took my seat across from him, folding my hands in my lap, pretending to be calmer than I felt. The whole walk over, I'd rehearsed what I would say if Henry questioned me about Alexander. But looking at him now, I realized that this conversation was never going to be fair.
He was trapped, maybe by his own family, maybe by fear, maybe by years of keeping the peace.
Whatever the reason, I was about to be collateral damage. For a long time, Henry just stared at the folder in front of him, his fingers nervously tapping the cover. He didn't look up until he finally found the words he'd been dreading. "Olivia, I wish this were different," he sighed, his voice frayed at the edges. "You've been a tremendous asset to Ashwood Industries. I hope you know that." A strange calm settled over me, but inside my chest felt tight. "Thank you, Henry. I appreciate that." He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, almost as if he was stalling for time. "It's not up to me anymore," he continued. "Sometimes there are decisions made that I just have to enforce." He met my eyes briefly, then looked away again. "You're being let go, effective immediately. You'll get a severance package, of course. Human resources will walk you through the next steps." There it was. The words I'd always feared but never truly believed I'd hear, at least, not like this. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching a play rather than living my own life. But there was no anger in me, just an odd sense of resolve. I took a slow, steadying breath. "Henry," I said quietly, "before you do anything else, can you please check your Gmail?" He blinked, confused by the request. Maybe he thought I was about to beg for my job or plead my case one last time. But I didn't waver. I held his gaze, feeling a spark of strength come back to me. "Please," I said again, more firmly. "Just check your Gmail before you make this official." He hesitated, then turned to the monitor on his desk, opening his email with slow, deliberate clicks. I watched his face, studying every flicker of emotion as he scanned his inbox. I had sent the email less than an hour before, right after Alexander's threat, when I realized just how deep this rabbit hole might go. He found it almost immediately, subject line, "For your eyes only, urgent team concerns." He clicked it open and I saw his face change as he began to read. His eyes narrowed, then widened in shock as he scrolled. I had attached a report with everything I'd uncovered in the last week's screenshots. Forwarded emails, even a transcript of a late-night phone call between Alexander and one of our competitors. My hands had trembled as I wrote the report, but I knew it was necessary. Too much was at stake. There was no satisfaction in watching Henry's face fall as the truth sank in. His mouth hung open for a moment, then he closed it, pressing his lips together as if holding back a wave of words he couldn't say. The color drained from his cheeks. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the hum of the computer and the rain outside. "Olivia," he finally whispered, voice hoarse, "are you telling me this is all true? Alexander tried to sabotage the Harrington deal?" I nodded once. "Every word. I have more if you need it." He rerouted emails, delayed files, and even offered to pay off our London clients to walk away. I didn't want to believe it at first, but the evidence was all there. I'm sorry you had to see it this way. Henry covered his face with his hands, taking several shaky breaths. He looked like a man unmoored, everything he'd believed suddenly in question. I felt a flicker of sympathy for him. Even in that moment, he was a father before he was a CEO. And the realization that his son could do something like this must have hurt more than any business setback ever could. He shook his head as if trying to clear it. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I wanted to be sure, I replied. And I hoped I was wrong. But when Alexander came to my office and threatened me, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't fire my team for something they didn't do. They were loyal to this company and to me. I had to protect them, even if it meant risking my job. Henry leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. I wondered what was going through his mind, how many times he'd looked the other way for his son, how many small infractions he'd forgiven, hoping things would change. Now, the truth was impossible to ignore. I'm so sorry, Olivia, he said quietly. I don't know what happens next. I need time to process this. I stood up, my resolve hardening. I understand. But I want you to know, whatever you decide, I stand by my team. We did nothing wrong, and I won't let them take the fall for this. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. I left his office with my head held high, trying not to look back. The hallways felt emptier than before, the lights too bright, the air too thin. I could hear the faint chatter of colleagues in nearby offices, but it all felt distant, unimportant. When I returned to my office, Sarah and Daniel were waiting for me, faces etched with concern. I didn't sugarcoat it. We've been fired, all of us, for now. Daniel swore under his breath, fists clenched. Sarah just stared, stunned. Is there anything we can do? I smiled at them, a small, tired smile. We did the right thing, that's all we can do, now we wait. And so we did, waiting for the next storm, for the truth to settle, for someone to finally do what was right. I sat at my desk, listening to the rain, hoping that this fall wasn't the end of our story, but the beginning of something better. The days that followed my dismissal passed in a strange blur, each one stretching longer than the last. The sky over Chicago remained gray and unyielding, the rain coming and going in fits, as if the weather itself was mirroring my mood. My days had always been so regimented: emails, calls, meetings, deadlines, but now time moved differently. I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in my hands, replaying every detail of what had happened at Ashwood Industries. Was there something more I could have done? Some way I could have protected my team and my job, without putting Henry in an impossible position. Doubt crept in quietly, as it always does when everything is suddenly out of your control. Sarah and Daniel called and texted often, their messages a lifeline in the uncertainty. We were all in the same boat, suspended in limbo, waiting to hear if the truth would matter in the end. Daniel was furious at first, swearing up and down that Alexander would get what he deserved. Sarah, ever the realist, tried to keep our spirits up, sending me job postings one minute and memes the next. For once, though, even her humor couldn't cut through the tension. What haunted me most was the look on Henry's face after he read my email, the shock, the disbelief, and finally the deep pain that came from realizing someone you love has betrayed your trust. I knew he was a father before he was a CEO, and the decision he faced must have been excruciating. I told myself that I'd done what was right, that protecting my team was worth whatever consequences came my way. But there were moments, late at night, when I wondered if I'd lost more than a job. Maybe I'd lost my place at Ashwood for good. 3 days after we were let go, my phone rang early in the morning. I nearly ignored it, thinking it was another recruiter or a telemarketer. But when I saw Henry's name on the screen, my stomach clenched. My hands shook as I answered. Olivia, he said, his voice quieter and gentler than I'd ever heard it. Could you come to the office? I'd like to see you. Bring Sarah and Daniel if you can. I agreed, though my mind raced with possibilities the whole drive downtown. I texted my team, and we met at the familiar coffee shop across from Ashwood's glass tower. Daniel was bristling with nervous energy, pacing as he sipped his drink, while Sarah tried to calm him. Though I could tell she was just as anxious, walking into the building felt surreal. The lobby was bustling, but it was as if I was seeing it for the first time, every detail sharper, more significant. The receptionist greeted us with her usual smile, pretending nothing had changed, and I wondered how many stories like ours played out in offices just like this every day. Henry was waiting for us in his office, standing when we entered. He looked older somehow, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been the last time we met. He motioned for us to sit, and for a moment we were silent, the tension heavy in the room. He spoke first, and the words poured out of him, more honest than I'd ever heard. I owe all of you an apology, especially you, Olivia. I should have trusted you from the start. I'm sorry for what I put you through, and for not seeing things clearly when it mattered most. I nodded, emotion catching in my throat. I didn't need an apology, I just needed to know that doing the right thing still mattered in a place like this. Henry continued, explaining how he'd spent the last few days combing through every file, every message. The evidence was irrefutable. He'd spoken to the board, to legal, and even to the London partners who had been nearly driven away by Alexander's interference. He had no choice but to take action. Alexander is being sent to Europe for further training, Henry said, choosing his words carefully. He won't be involved in your work anymore. The board is handling it, and I don't expect you'll hear from him anytime soon. There was a collective sigh of relief. For a moment I thought that was the end of it, that he'd thank us and send us on our way. Instead, Henry pulled out 3 crisp envelopes and slid them across the desk, one for each of us. Not only are you all reinstated, he said, looking me in the eye, but, Olivia, I want you to accept a new position, head of global operations. You'll oversee all our international projects, including London. Your leadership is exactly what this company needs. The new contract reflects your value $200,000 a year, with additional bonuses in pounds from our partners abroad. I was speechless. Daniel whooped with joy, unable to contain his excitement, and even Sarah's composure cracked as she grinned at me with genuine pride. The relief was overwhelming. After so many days spent doubting, wondering if the truth would matter, here was proof that sometimes it did. As the meeting wrapped up, Henry stood and shook each of our hands, his gratitude unmistakable. Thank you for protecting this company, and for reminding me what real loyalty looks like. I won't forget it. Leaving his office felt different this time. We walked out as a team, as a family, stronger for what we'd been through. We stopped in the lobby, laughing with a kind of giddy disbelief, and promised to celebrate that night. For the first time in days, the sun was shining, burning through the gray clouds outside. It felt like a sign. Back at my desk, I looked around the office, seeing it not as a battleground, but as a place of new beginnings. The view of the city seemed brighter, every detail alive with possibility. My phone buzzed with congratulations from colleagues, even some who'd kept their distance before. My team settled in, Sarah cracking jokes as always, Daniel already diving into the next project. That afternoon, as I walked through the hallways, I realized something important. The job, the title, even the money, they mattered, of course. But what mattered most was knowing I'd done the right thing, and that it hadn't been for nothing. We'd stood up for each other, faced down the storm, and come out the other side stronger than before. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. This was just the beginning. Sometimes, in the early hours before the world fully wakes, I find myself sitting at the small round table in my kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee between my hands. The house is quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city just beginning its day. From the window, I can see the first rays of sunlight painting the tops of Chicago's tallest buildings gold. I bought this house, an old brick bungalow out on the city's edge, with the bonus check from my first big success at Ashwood Industries. Back then, it felt like a symbol of all the things I'd been working toward: independence, stability, a place I could finally call my own. Now, in moments like this, it feels like much more than that. It's become a reminder of everything I've gained and everything I've learned. After returning to Ashwood, life did not simply slip back into its old rhythms. The promotion to head of global operations was more than a new title and a bigger paycheck. It was a new set of challenges, and a chance to lead not just with strategy, but with heart. There were more meetings, longer hours, and bigger stakes. There were also more voices to listen to, new people to mentor, and, for the first time, a real sense that I could shape the culture of the company I cared about. Sarah and Daniel remained by my side, as loyal and brilliant as ever. Over the weeks, our friendship deepened into something like family. We celebrated not just our victories but our failures, the times we missed out on a contract, or a proposal was rejected, or we simply felt overwhelmed by the endless demands of our jobs. Through all of it, we leaned on each other. I learned to value Sarah's quick wit, which could cut through even the most stressful situations, and Daniel's relentless optimism, which never failed to pull us out of the darkest moments. And I realized that, for all my stubbornness and drive, I could not have done any of this without them. The experience with Alexander left a mark on all of us. Even as the company moved forward, there were whispers in the hallways, nervous glances, the quiet knowledge that everything could have turned out so differently. Alexander's absence was a silent acknowledgement of what had happened, and though the official story was that he'd been sent to Europe for further training, everyone knew the truth was more complicated. In some ways, I felt sympathy for him, how hard it must be to live in someone else's shadow, always expected to take over the family legacy, whether or not you're ready for it. But I never regretted standing up to him. Protecting my team was the right thing to do, even if it had nearly cost me everything. With my new role came new responsibilities, and soon, I found myself traveling first to New York, then to San Francisco, and even to London to meet with our partners there. Each city brought its challenges, but I began to realize how much I enjoyed the movement, the sense of possibility. I was no longer simply reacting to other people's decisions. I was setting the direction for our company's future. I was trusted to make the hard calls, to say no when it mattered, to build something lasting. And with each success, I tried to pay forward what I'd learned. When junior employees came to me with problems, I really listened. I encouraged them to speak up, to trust their instincts, to know their worth. I told them, sometimes over lunch or a coffee in the break room, that doing the right thing wouldn't always be easy, and sometimes it would cost them. But in the end, it was the only thing that would let them sleep at night. I told them that sometimes the most important thing you can do is protect the people who depend on you, even if it means putting yourself at risk. Over time, my team became known for more than just our results. We became known for our loyalty to each other, for the way we shared credit and took responsibility, for our willingness to lift each other up. Our work took us to new heights, landing the biggest contract in Ashwood's history, launching projects in London, Berlin, and even Paris. The bonuses were nice, of course. With every success, my bank account grew, and I was able to renovate the house, travel more, and give back to my community. But none of those things, not even the house I loved so much, could compare to the satisfaction of knowing I'd built something real, a team, a culture, a legacy. Sometimes, in the quiet, I think about what might have happened if I'd chosen the easy road that day, if I'd let Alexander bully me into firing my team, if I'd walked away from the truth just to keep my job. Would I still be here in this house watching the sun rise over the city I love? Would Sarah and Daniel still be by my side? Would my team trust me the way they do? I don't know. All I do know is that every good thing in my life came from that single, stubborn moment when I refused to back down. Even now, years later, there are days when I feel the old fear creep back, in the fear of losing everything, of being betrayed, of standing alone. But then I remember, I've been through the fire and come out stronger. I've learned that leadership isn't about power or money or even success. It's about courage. It's about doing what's right, even when it costs you. It's about protecting your people and building something that lasts. And that, in the end, is the real reward. So, if you ever find yourself at a crossroads faced with a choice between the easy path and the right one, think of me, sitting here in my old house, watching the sun rise. Remember that sometimes, the real reward isn't what you gain, but what you refuse to lose. That's how I got fired, then got promoted without ever backing down.